Everybody, what's going on? Happy Culture Class Wednesday. So excited to be here. 1 second, because our Zeitguide is having trouble logging on. So let me just deal with that. Sorry. Okay. Um, Mike Lubin. I guess they don't use Zoom in real estate. Marlene, you're there though. We're excited to have you.
Excited to be here.
Mike, I'm on already. I don't know what's going on. Marlene's here, but Sherry is supposed to call you. I'm going to text you. I don't know. Yep, I'm dealing with it. Bye. Oh my God. Sherry, please help. All right, well, back to what we were talking about. So everybody, if you didn't know, that was Beyonce's latest song that she released on Juneteenth, right? The new holiday, hopefully nationally, that celebrates the end of slavery. And on that day, Beyonce released this song. And it's, for those of you who haven't heard it, I was hoping that you heard it because it's very zeitgeist. And for those of you who have heard it, I just wanted to kind of scroll through the lyrics so everybody can see exactly what she really means. If you just, I have some highlights there. The baobab tree actually was just in East Africa exactly a year ago. And the baobab tree is a tree that grows in Africa, even in really warm climates. So, you know, she has these roots from Africa. It's growing like a baobab tree. And that's something that she's talking about. She's obviously very mad about what's going on. This is her chorus. And she's coming on her throne. And My Parade, Oh My Parade is really about her protesting. So here she's basically giving tribute to many of her Black idols and Black artists. And she's talking about her sister, Solange. And here, rubber bullets bouncing off of me. Those are the rubber bullets that signify what the police, the brutal police, have been doing during the protests. And this is also during the pandemic, right? We got to still keep thinking about that. Here we have Curtis Mayfield, an amazing Black artist. And the one thing that I just wanted to skip to is that she's also talking about the need for peace and the reparations for her people. So I was just deconstructing everything that she was just saying in the song. I love it. I love Beyonce. So thought I would help you all out with that. So moving forward, if you don't know me, my name is Brad Grossman, and I'm the founder and CEO of Zeitguide. And Zeitguide means guide to the zeitgeist. Zeitgeist is a German word that means spirit of the times, for those of you who don't know. This is just a little bit of repetition for everybody who's been on other culture classes. I've been doing culture class for a year and a half for my clients, which are mainly C-suite executives and their teams, which help them understand the big picture, the big context, so they could stay culturally relevant and smart. And now I'm saying inspired to reinvent the future. And this is our 5th class, and what I started in terms of the summer semester, and basically our 16th class from the beginning of Corona. So I've been doing this every Wednesday at 2 p.m. East Coast time. And you know, I did 11 for free, and then we started our summer semester, which is now a pay-as-you-can. So for those of you who contributed, thank you very much. And those of you who are interested in my custom culture classes, just email me at brad@zeitguide.com, that I do for organizations to keep them all on this learning journey. All right. Moving on, when I am distilling and synthesizing the world of ideas, I'm always looking at 4 big buckets. I'm looking at global societal trends. I'm looking at emerging tech. I'm looking at consumer trends, and I'm looking at what's happening in work. And I will go through, before we have our very special Zeit guests, Marlene and hopefully Mike Lubin, Marlene Jemal and hopefully Mike Lubin, if you figured out how to get on.
I am here.
And yay! Everybody give Mike a round of applause. Mike, I'm sure, is running around showing, now that New York has opened, new apartments and houses in New York City. So, we'll be a little bit accepting. So anyway, before we go to their Zeitgeist, which is going to focus and highlight the zeitgeist of real estate right now in a world of Corona and protests and pride and politics, that's the theme of the week, I'm just going to be doing some Zeitguiding. And every time I bring you an insight or give you a provocation or a question to think about, I always ask you to yourselves or with your teams or with anybody to say, you know what did I learn? Why is this learning relevant to me as both a business person and as a citizen of the world? What can you do with this learning, and how can you integrate this learning into your own business practice, strategy, and decision-making and life? So that being said, I'm just going to go forward. So starting with global. Now, since week 1 on March 18th, when we were basically sequestered in our homes, I basically did a theme of the week. And I'm just going to scroll down because many of you have been with me since the beginning. And if you just want to remember what's been happening in the last 15 weeks, this is what happened. Week 12 was basically the week after George Floyd's death and the beginning of the protests. And, I was saying that this actually, as it should have been, the forefront of the conversation, where you saw less Sanjay Gupta on CNN, who was illuminating everything about the COVID. And so last week, which was week 14, since March 18th, I talked about the theme of the intersection and the intersectionality. I'll go to intersectionality to review in a bit, which I think is an interesting concept. But in terms of the intersection, just last week was when the protests continued to be in the zeitgeist and in the media, but also that dovetail with an increasing storyline of COVID, back to COVID in many different ways. And as I said, this week, I would say the theme in terms of my analysis is politics, protests, pride, and pandemic, the 4 Ps. And just to see this really interesting, and we're going to start with global, where we've been experiencing, and you could see on the bottom and over here, the number of deaths because of Corona. We were literally here in January, right? And this is globally, right? Look at Corona, look, it's starting to rise. It's surpassing natural disasters in February. And we'll just let this sit for a second so you could kind of look at the global context of everything that's happening in the zeitgeist. And it's crazy. Look at this. All right, we're still in third to the bottom in March. Look at it jump up. April, jump up, jump up, jump up, jump. Number 3. Number 2. And then it has beat malaria at the end of April through May. And you could see all of the deaths that have happened. And that's only to May. And just yesterday or today, the New York Times highlighted the fact that cases in the United States has grown to their highest levels since April. And just to give you a few things of context, these are the headlines of New York Times today. The one that's most interesting to me is that New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, New York City just opened up stage 2 today, which we're going to talk to Mike and Marlene about in a second. But Cuomo basically said that, I think there were 9 states, and travelers coming from 9 states have to be quarantined before they enter New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. So we could see how much COVID is rising in the conversation again. So let's go back to the protests. One of the things that I actually found fascinating is that the protests fueled record traffic to donation sites in the last couple weeks. And these are all the different, if you are donating money to organizations, which you should, these are the ones that people are most donating. What's most interesting to me is that more than 20% of that traffic came from countries outside the United States. So you can see how other countries are basically sympathizing with us. Let's go back to the racism and the protest and the racial injustice. We see all these statues being toppled and our president saying that shouldn't happen because they are emblems of history. But there was a poll in the South and people said, just for a little pop cultural thing, that Dolly Parton statue should basically replace all the Confederate monuments. I thought that was pretty fun thing to think about. One of the things we have been talking about, and we had Cindy Gallup on a couple weeks ago, and our culture class got a lot of recognition about what she said about ending racism in the corporate world. Adweek covered it, and Campaign Magazine called us the movers and shakers of the week in the media and advertising industry because of that culture class. And, everybody's talking about it. We're seeing a lot of firings, a lot of people being pushed out. I think the newest one was the editor of one business magazine, and people have been talking about, the employees have been speaking up about how undiverse their companies are, and they're blaming the CEOs. And but one of the things we all really have to be careful of, I just learned this term from somebody, and of course I'm always trying to give you zeitgeisty terms, and this is actually an Al Jazeera, which, because my job is to read everything, is the trap of performative activism. It's really important. We started in seeing brands showing their ads about support and ending racial injustice and their Blackout Tuesday. And now they're, distributing or donating, in some cases, tens of hundreds of millions of dollars, but now they got to do the work, right? You can't just perform and show the world that you're doing something good. You actually have to do the work to dismantle racial injustice. So that's the racism part. Let's move over to Pride. This is Pride Month. This next weekend, I believe, is historically the big Pride parade, and it's usually World Pride Day in New York City, and that's not happening. But in terms of the Pride conversation, there are, and New York Times actually did a piece about this last Sunday, if you want. And by the way, everybody who donated or gave us, thank you very much. You'll get a list of all these links. So thank you, but I'm just putting that out there. The New York Side Special Report, ABC is going to have a big celebration that you could actually watch on television, not just online, featuring these artists. Procter & Gamble actually is holding a COVID, basically a Pride event that's basically, we can't do Pride because of COVID. So again, you see the intersection of now COVID and Pride. And the intersectionality part, intersectionality is a term that was coined 20 years ago by a female Black scholar. And intersectionality is basically, there's hashtags Black Lives Matters, but it became hashtags All Black Lives Matters, so that Black lives can be segmented into other marginalized groups, which is the GLBTQIA community, gay, lesbian, bisexual, questioning, intersexual, and asexual community. And All Lives Matters, you're not just seeing people who are promoting Black Lives Matters, but you're seeing trans people, see the GLBTQIA colors. So intersectionality is really the intersection of defining yourself through many different marginalizations. So there's Pride, that's global. So in terms of the technology, I've been talking so much about the techlash in the last, I guess if you've been reading my Zeitguide Cultural Almanac, which, I used to do, now I'm bringing it live through this, about the techlash, and that the big tech companies are growing and growing and growing. Are they monopolistic? Are there going to be regulations against them? They've been chided for promoting FOMO for Gen Zs and increasing mental health problems and obviously fake news. But many of them have been positive in terms of changing culture during this current climate. We knew that, Twitter has been putting these, you can't share it, these markers, these warning signs about everything that our president has been saying. So Trump has really been, Twitter has been really positive for culture in terms of they signify that Trump's looting and shooting quote was dangerous to society. And, just yesterday, they basically, tweeted, flagged a Trump tweet that violated another abusive behavior, saying that he was going to take down, threatening serious force against protesters seeking to create an autonomous zone in Washington. And we've been talking about Facebook, which initially in COVID, there was a positive understanding or connection from consumers because they have been enabling us all to stay together. But because of Mark Zuckerberg's reluctance to take down all of Trump's pejorative social media versus Twitter and Snapchat, Facebook has been getting a bad rap. And so the interesting thing is that there have been protests by advertising agencies and brands and actually last week it was the AARP and other Black social justice organizations telling or pleading for advertisers and brands to take their businesses or promotions off of Facebook. And it was basically Patagonia and North Face, the outside apparel companies that first were, but the list of brands are continuing. The biggest one, or the one that has been happening in the last couple of days, has been Ben and Jerry's. So, here's an example. They put it on Twitter, but they won't do it won't advertise on Facebook. So the thing in terms of social media and technology, if you missed it, one of the reasons why many people did not show up, Trump thought there were going to be millions of people showing up at the Trump rallies, but there weren't because these TikTok teens, for those of you who don't know what TikTok is, it now has 800 million members around the world. And it's a new social media platform. I don't have time to really get into that, but it's mainly used by teenagers, and now people actually love it. If you just sit back and binge watch TikTok videos, you might have a fun time, or you might be an addict as well, just like the teenagers. But K-pop stands means hardcore K-pop fans, and K-pop are Korean pop bands. And they basically did some amazing things to kind of create and disseminate these signups for people to say that they're going to go to the rally in Tulsa, but it basically was just a fake thing. So Trump would think that there would be millions of people there, and there were only a little bit over 6,000. And, the trend quickly spread because of TikTok, this whole thing, but thousands of others posted similar tweets and videos to TikTok that racked up millions of views. So the thing is that these K-pop people were playing with the algorithm and doing all these crazy things that they're really smart at doing. That's why some K-pop bands literally are exploding in popularity in social media and TikTok, because they really know how to work the system. Now, the thing about all these media platforms, TikTok being the one thing, the latest one, is that, all these social media platforms seem like they are donating and they're heartless, but at the same time, their algorithms are also undermining Black Lives Matter and other social justice movements because of their algorithms. In fact, last week I showed that the top 10 news resources that are the top 10 news sources that are being promoted on my light just fell that are being promoted on Facebook are by right-wing conservative publications. So, there's the good and the bad, and that's why I'm talking about the tech paradox, right? And then just to So Facebook, the tech paradox, but the thing is, there could also be an implication, a paradox with TikTok now. I mean, TikTok showed that they could be used for dismantling right conservatism and hate in the world. But if Trump was able to game the system with Twitter, they're showing the right wingers, the Republicans who are supporting Trump or anybody else, that the far right is watching this too, and they could put they could acquire some of the knowledge that we've seen with TikTok. So that's the tech paradox theme. And all provoke your thinking as well, because my job is to help you think about these things, not just know about these things, is that, if all these tech communities and digital platforms are promoting, racism and hate in the world, we are basically trying to, I'm hoping most people on this are trying to dismantle racism, and we're boycotting Facebook, or many brands are. Should we also, as individuals, boycott Facebook? Just a couple years ago, Bob Iger, I think he's now the chairman, he's not the CEO of the Walt Disney Company anymore, did a whole speech for the Museum of Tolerance when he got honored about how social media invokes hate. So if we are trying to do this on a corporate level, should we also do this on a personal level? Moving forward to the consumer things that I've been thinking about and connecting the dots with is that we've been talking about the dismantleization of the new canon. We're creating a new canon, a dismantleization of the old canon. Like in high school, we were reading only novels by, white men, really, except for maybe Jane Austen, very few, black and brown people. And now the canon is being reconstituted, but we are also seeing this be reconstituted in terms of the canon. And just in the last couple weeks, there are every type of media, music, television, books, podcasts, and more. I just showed the Beyonce video, are fighting systemic racism by removing things like cops in cop shows. In fact, Fortnite, the big game, basically just said that they were going to take cops out of this huge game that everybody's doing. And, HBO Max first removed Gone with the Wind off their platform. And then after there were record downloads of Gone with the Wind on Amazon, HBO said that this is a really good time to take this off, to put it back on, but reconstitute it with a black scholar talking about, why it was created and why is there the subtext of racism. So not just Beyonce, but Whale, Black Eyed Peas, Tiana Taylor, and others basically said that they debuted albums of songs on Juneteenth as well. And the remix version of Childish Gambino's 2018 hit, This Is America, became a viral anthem on TikTok. So that being said, I'm going to just move forward in advertising, because we've been talking a lot about the evolution of advertising through COVID. And in the very beginning, people were, brands didn't know how to communicate, because it would be very tasteless to sell to people who were home. And then that evolved to all these commercials that had the same song saying, in these uncertain times. You couldn't really tell the difference between a car ad and a Wayfair ad, because they all seem the same in terms of tone, content, and music. But just today, Budweiser released this ad. So we are open for business, and we're going to get to that conversation in 1 minute after I show this one that Vegas just put out. And that's a good segue into our hearts and minds segment. Oh, by the way, all right, just the takeaway for consumer. How should we balance this? This is going to be just as hard because, yeah, we're open for business, but there are the highest cases in the United States, and Brazil is crazy. Like, we're not over COVID. So how are we going to balance this and what's going to happen? I actually went out to dinner last night, sitting on the patio to one of my favorite Israeli restaurants called Zizi. It's in Chelsea. And I spoke to the chef, and he's like, two things. I've been trying to get outdoor seating for years, and now I got it. And we'll talk to Marlene about that in a second. But secondly is like these assholes in New York who aren't social distancing could basically create a new upswing of cases. And what does that mean? Cuomo might shut us all down, and that will be even worse for the restaurants. So this is a good time to go into the workplace, which is work, which is going to be signified by our conversation, which is our hearts and minds segment. We're going to start with commercial real estate with Marlene Jemal. And then we're going to go to residential real estate with Mike Lubin. And so, Marlene, that's Mike, sorry. This is your website. You are a commercial advisor, real estate. And my light keeps falling down. Okay, there we go. Sorry. And we're going to unshare the screen. And I am blessed to say welcome to Marlene. Marlene, are you there? Say hi.
Hi, everybody. Great to see everybody.
Okay. So as I said, thank you for being here. Thank you for being here. I know we just opened, so you're probably like, your phone is ringing off the hook. You're probably grateful that you don't have to do all these Zooms anywhere and you could actually use a real phone, right? So let's get started, Marlene. So first of all, I always like to ask this one question because it's the hearts and minds segment. Okay. What has been in your heart and what has been in your mind? Like, how are you feeling in true authenticity? I mean, we're trying to be optimistic now, but like, what have you, because I'm trying to be like the Barbara Walters of culture and business. You don't have to cry, but what's going on?
So I love your culture club because what I'm feeling right now as a group that we all have to get together as a culture. We have to get together as consumer, as owner, together and really fight what has been going on. Our hearts have been hurt. We've lost deeply. And what we have to do is come together and work together. And that's the key word, to make sure that through this pandemic, through post-COVID, that we get together, that we make sure that we implement safety measures, that we hear one another, that we communicate our needs with one another, that if we're going into an office, we want to make sure that we're safe. We want to have safe buildings. We want to have a safe environment. Restaurants, I know you went to an Israeli restaurant, my favorite as well. We want
to really? Oh, cool. At least I have good taste, right?
We want to make sure that we're safe, that maybe the menus are disposable, that we have the outdoor seating, hand sanitizers everywhere. We want to make sure that also our servers are wearing masks and they're taking precautions and washing their hands. And we don't forget what we've all been through in the past 3 months, and that we're taking all the safety measures still to make sure that we maintain and we go forward together as a group.
And so you've been really spending the last 3 months connecting with your clients and your customers and your employees, because we're all connected. All right. So before I ask you some more specific questions, just tell us exactly like what you do. What is a commercial real estate person in terms of what you do, and maybe tell us about, you know, who some of your clients are. You don't have to name names, but what type of people, and what is your job?
So generally, we're off market. We deal mainly with properties that really never get to hit the market. We deal because of our relationships with our landlords, with owners of buildings. We're able to really communicate with them when they're ready to sell, what's going on in the market, and really touch base with the sellers before it hits the market so that you avoid all of that, you know, panhandling and competitiveness. We deal with a lot of office buildings, and we deal with multifamily buildings mostly. And we've had a large success doing that.
What do you mean by multifamily buildings? Because you do commercial, right?
We do commercial, so multifamily. So if you have about 20 residential buildings in a unit, mixed use buildings with retail on the bottom, that's also considered commercial.
Gotcha. Okay, so and then you said office. Do you have customers that are in retail and restaurants and you know those spaces as well? Okay, so what are they thinking? I mean, you know, I've been reading so much about, you know, stores closing, they're opening up. I just read something that Neiman Marcus is going to be, you know, they rented a space in Hudson Yards, and Facebook is going to move in there, which is interesting. We had the retail apocalypse before, right? So what's happening now that COVID impacted all of us?
So we've been at a decline in retail from before COVID. So now imagine COVID. So it's really impacted greatly. Retailers are suffering, and you have national tenants like Neiman Marcus, who, you know, now they're filed for bankruptcy, and, you know, Simon Properties is suing them. And
yeah, I did read that. And yeah, the Gap too, right? Are being sued too, I just read. So like, what does that mean? Why are they getting sued?
well, they're not paying their rent. And also so they've been suffering way before this pandemic. So now post pandemic, 3 months of not paying, it amounts to a 64 million, I guess, for Simon Properties not to get their rents right now, not being paid. And the national tenants are just, you know, they're asking either for rent concessions or just not paying.
Wow. And let's just talk about office spaces, right? So, you know, I've been reading, there's been so much press. I mean, I think now that we opened, right, I think only 10 or 20%, like, is that true, of New Yorkers are going back to work,
Yes.
even though we're open?
Yes, they're expecting 300,000 workers to come back to the city post the pandemic. We are getting a slow start. We're getting a slow start to getting into Manhattan, getting into the office space. People are still, they're taking their time getting back in there. But
And their bosses are letting them.
I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
their bosses are letting them.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, phase 2 began on Monday. So yes, their bosses, everyone's excited. We've lost a lot of touch with reality in terms of connectivity, getting together, working together. Just we've been isolated. So
Are rents going down? It seems like, you know, Neiman Marcus or Gap being sued. Like, are they going to kind of reconstitute their rents?
so what I'm saying and seeing is that we can negotiate rents. There are people leaving, and also owners want to have their tenants in place. So they will work together with the tenants.
Okay.
What I'm seeing is that the landlords are also reconfiguring their spaces and their buildings. They want to make sure that their tenants are safe. They're working on air purifiers, sanitational dispensers, just to make sure it's social distancing, all of that. They have to implement those office buildings so that the tenants, when they come in, they're feeling safe as well.
Uh-huh. And what about, I mean, do you think that a lot of companies are going to be closing their offices and moving out of New York City into other areas. I mean, I can't wait to talk to Mike about this because we've been reading about the exodus, not just the Hudson Valley, but in San Francisco, and people are leaving. Is that a fear?
Of course, there's a fear, but you also have the technology companies who, we're in New York, we're in the greatest New York City hub ever. And a lot of talented people gathered here together.
Mm-hmm.
They're
Yeah, I'm just showing one thing. There was a piece that I'll put in the chat about all these, companies that are stepping up to help office buildings and places to be safe. So yeah, this is just something that I found really interesting that I was curious about.
Yes, they're doing touch-free elevators. They're going to limit the passengers in the elevator. They're really, before then we had the green building, energy efficient buildings. Now we're really focused on the safe buildings and the healthy buildings. And this is going to be a new culture. Monday Properties.
A healthy building, that's interesting. Okay, that makes sense. Huh,
Yeah.
so we're green buildings. Yeah, that's one of the fears that I have. Like, we were probably culturally speaking at the pinnacle, well, hold on, I put this in chat, of the climate change conversation pre-COVID, and now it just seems that I'm fearful that we're going to stop thinking about green buildings. It's like I just everybody's using plastic forks now. That's not good for the environment. So all right, so thank you for coming. I'd love you to stay on because I'm going to bring Mike on right now, so there might be some overlap. But last question I want to ask you, if you are buying commercial buildings, right, is this an opportunity?
Absolutely.
And
well, I think we need to wait further, Brad, to see where everything is going to fall, because we still have the grace period for, the mortgages, and landlords still are feeling their way into the investment and all their obligations. So I think coming this fall, going forward, I think we're going to be able to see and really capture on great advantages of the market.
And if retailers and restaurants don't come back, are they going to be empty in some of the cities like New York, or could they be turning into, maybe this is a question for Mike to chime in, Mike Lubin, why don't I introduce you before I ask the question? Mike Lubin.
Hi there.
You like my place, by the way? It's beautiful, right?
I love it. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you. So Mike Lubin is at Brown Harris Stevens residential. That's correct, right? Brown Harris Stevens.
Yep.
Residential real estate agent. And obviously, it's been challenging for you right now, and you're just opening up for business too right now. But I guess one of the things that, I'm curious for both of you, and then I'll move over to Mike, is that could you see a convergence? We saw Charles Renfro, who is Diller Scofidio Renfro, who designed, he's the architect of the High Line. And we had him on a few weeks ago, and he basically said that he sees, by the way, he says nothing's going to be impacted by COVID. He's not changing anything. But, he sees a New York or a city culture where there might be these like living, breathing buildings where there's retail, there's, affordable housing, there's, hotels, co-working spaces, offices. Like if all these commercial places might go out of business and it's hard to replace them, do you think they might be replaced by homes? Like, will Mike take your business away?
I don't think homes, because buildings are zoned a certain zoning. So you're not going to turn commercial into homes, but you can turn it into, let's say, gyms, or reconfigure the space as, let's say, a ground floor office space, or, just converting that and just zone, and that you're occupying the space most efficiently. And again, that's part of working together and seeing what goes well, and the tenancy in place. You have the co-tenancy. You want to make sure that it all flows correctly.
Yeah. Well, maybe I see mergers and acquisitions, you know, between commercial, even though Mike, you told me it's such a different thing. So let's switch to Mike. Thank you so much, Marlene. If you don't mind staying on, because people are asking questions if we have time in the end. And you know, you might have a different opinion than Mike because a lot of the questions are the same. But Mike, when I spoke with you and I'm like, I really would love to talk commercial too. And you're like, that's a different thing. I have no idea, you know, talk to somebody else. Why is it a different thing? Like why is it, are you experiencing different situations?
Well, first of all, I have to say how thrilled I am to join you today.
Thank you.
You know, I'm not only a friend and admirer of yours for many years, but I absolutely love this series of work that you're doing and bringing different people together and speaking about contemporary topics and culture and everything relevant to today. So I'm thrilled to be here.
Thank you.
I also have to say I'm humbled, and I'm going to have a very tough act to follow. I can't get over just how insightful Marlene was with regard to the, not that I'm surprised, she's someone I also have admired for so long, but just I took so much away from that incredible topic and presentation. And so I'm just thrilled to be here and also really learned quite a bit just from the past few minutes.
Okay.
So tell me.
Now let's learn from you.
Let's hope so. So please repeat your question.
Yeah.
or
okay, you said it's a different thing, right? So
yes.
What do you think? I mean, you're not an expert.
Okay, I could tell you in a very basic way.
Yeah.
To me, the way they're different, and I'm sure it's a very subjective answer, is commercial or retail is very much a need-based business. You know, where a firm or a business, you know, would need an X number of square footage in a particular location. And I personally think of real estate as a very emotional, residential real estate is a very emotional need-based. Obviously, someone will have a particular desire for space, but it tends to be, even though we think of it as how much space do you need, it tends to be very want or desire driven versus, you know, looking at square footage or an actual dollar amount of cap rate, you know, in terms of recouping particular investment assets. So I think of it as desire versus a functional need.
And back to the hearts and minds, what have you been experiencing in the last 3 months? I mean, you stayed in New
today's
York,
a little bit hectic because, yeah, I've been in New York the whole time. So as Marlene mentioned, Monday was our first day where as residential and commercial real estate brokers that we've been permitted to actually do our job in person. So you can imagine I've had 3 months of backlog of sellers who want to get their apartments on the market, buyers who've been curious about what's going on. We're in a brand new experience in terms of how we may enter buildings and homes. We actually must submit liability and health waivers to indicate, you know, in writing that the broker and that the buyer do not exhibit any symptoms and that they're in good health, and that the sellers require a liability, you know, should anyone ever feel that a broker or buyer contracted an illness because of visiting in an apartment. It's surreal. You know, it's absolutely, you know, like you, I've been in this city the whole time. So I've experienced.
No, I actually haven't. I just got back.
Oh, I thought you've been here. Okay.
No, I was.
I have been here, you know, and I feel very
so
blessed.
Happy to be home. So happy.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
I've
been here. And
how I built culture class in Connecticut. It's like, now I feel I'm like books.
You know? You mentioned you were in Chelsea last night. I figured you've been here the whole time. I've been here, you know, since March. I've only been away a few days. So how
have you been showing offerings? Because were people actually selling during this time?
We haven't been permitted to actually show apartments. So the work that we may have been doing, you know, could have been staging, getting apartments ready. If buyers were in contract prior to the pandemic, there have been closings, but those deals were signed, you know, most likely December, January, February. So there was that activity, but there was basically, the industry itself was really on hold for the past 3 months. So there was activity in terms of closing and preparing apartments for sale. Potentially, a lot of what we're doing now is creating more of a virtual world.
Asked about that. Yeah.
Yeah. 3D, there's a brand called Matterport, and they have branded, I think, a very effective 3D tour of a home. So you really feel like it's self-guided. So you could actually walk yourself into closets, into
T-E-R-P-O-R-T.
Matterport, yes. And, you know, if you, depending on how detailed you want to be, you're literally walking yourself around a room, you're looking into a pantry and a kitchen, and you're really getting a space, getting a sense of the space, short of, you know, the virtual glasses that we were potentially doing some years ago, you know, on a self-guided way. And they're fantastic. So I'm putting all of my listings on tour because we really, the theme that I love from Marlene, which I want to focus on, is health. You know, more than ever have we realized how valuable and precious our health is. And Marlene spoke about it with regard to, you know, some years ago it was LEED certified and wanting to make sure that we're being conscious of the environment, which is of course as important, if not more than ever. But it's so much also about, is it a healthy, healthful feeling building? Is the building enhancing our health in some way versus somehow detracting? So hence a Matterport tour where we are exposing ourselves to fewer people, and we're only going to see an apartment that really is inviting us after we've spent more time researching it online.
So now people are starting to go into physical spaces, right?
Just as of Monday. So we're in day 3 of it.
Required to, like, what's the process? So say, hey, Mike, I saw this listing, go show it to me.
No, it's complicated now. So we have to have 2 signed documents. Well, first of all, there are 2 things. One, fair housing laws have changed. So we are sending a fair housing disclaimer that represents, which is obviously so incredibly important, that we are, you know, have a very clear policy of equal opportunity home viewing and ownership, and that we're proponents of fair housing rules. And in the past, it was something that would have been hoped and implied, but now it's actually something that we very appropriately are making clear in writing in advance, that we forbid any type of discriminatory housing. But now we also have to have 2 documents signed that are related to COVID. So one is a release of liability, and the other is a declaration of health, of our health before we could enter a home. And of course we wear masks.
So how do you know that though? Like, you know, how can you be honest about that? Like, you don't
well,
know.
We hope that the person writing is they're signing that they do not have a fever, that they don't have any symptoms, that they are in good health, you know, and it is in fact a legal document they are signing. And certainly someone could be asymptomatic and not know, but it's being taken quite seriously in this industry. We are very careful to not expose doormen and people who work within buildings, as well as residents and others, you know, and homeowners who are very careful about their own health, want to be very sure that anyone coming into their home is healthy and well.
Are they wearing gloves? Are they wearing masks?
Well, we wear masks.
Okay.
We certainly, you know, sanitize when we leave. We're not allowing guests to use a restroom. We're not using bathrooms in people's homes. We're restricting as much tactile of the experience as possible, in terms of touching as little as possible. And, oh, can you hear me?
Yep, I can.
I'm sorry. And really limiting any type of exposure. So
yeah, I just wanted to show one thing that could be interesting. This is the new hot product. A bag you can.
Oh God.
So
I'll be buying.
You might want to have those when you're walking through the door.
A good pitch or closing gift.
There you go. Okay, now let's talk Exodus. Right? Are you, you know, are you seeing a lot more people who want to sell their place and or not be in New York anymore or in any other cities?
Well, you know, we know that news media, you know, everyone has to focus on a story, you know, so the story for a little while had been, and probably still is, everyone's leaving the city. You know, if you have a house in the Hamptons, you're moving to the Hamptons, you're moving to Greenwich and Westchester. And that is certainly true.
You just touched cash. Who uses cash anymore? Anyway.
You can't imagine what I'm doing. I just had windows cleaned and a new listing of mine. And I'm giving a tip to the wonderful gentleman, Alex, who does all my windows.
I love it. You in action.
So there are people who are leaving the city. In my personal business, the people who are leaving the city now, or have asked me to sell their home or discuss selling their home, we're always going to be leaving the city, and it was a matter of timing. So maybe they thought it was going to be when they had their 2nd or 3rd child, and the plan was already there.
This is the time.
I don't know anyone who has said to me, I've been happy in the city, I never thought I would leave, and now I'm ready to leave. I don't want to be here anymore. I'm not comfortable, or I don't feel safe here anymore. I personally have not had anyone say that to me. the people that I'm working with who have chosen to move elsewhere had already been planning to do so, and it was about timing. Certainly we saw
I've heard
yeah,
those
and certainly we saw Florida had attracted many people, with regard to tax changes, and there's, and certainly people have decided to leave. What I think we're talking about in terms of an exodus is many people who, and certainly in New York, there's so many individuals who have second or third homes, and with school being on hold or camps, et cetera, they've chosen to spend more time. So from March, possibly through the rest of the summer, will be, Long Island, Hamptons, Westchester.
Right.
And I do believe it's very much school driven. If schools are again in person and classes resume in person in September, I believe these people will most likely be coming back. If it's virtual, if it's online.
By all of us working people have to say.
And that's the thing. And if school is online.
In the Wall Street Journal or New York Times, I can't remember.
If you have young kids and school is online, you most likely would be very happy to stay in your house, with your yard and not return to the city until school resumes. So every case is different. But
what about, I have a friend who owns a place and he has rented it. He's a condo, not a co-op. And for those of you who don't know the difference, a co-op, you have a board that has to approve. I'm in a co-op, whether you could have somebody rent your place or not. Condos, you could do whatever you want. He has a condo. He's been renting it. And he literally just got an email from the tenant saying, we don't want to be in New York anymore. We want to leave. So have you heard those examples, and what's the protocol?
Well, the truth is there are those examples, certainly. But remember, this is not, and I was here during 9/11, and my son was about 3 months away from being born, and working in the city, and that was, and which we'll never recover from, but it was very much a New York experience, right? But what's so different about COVID is that this is a worldwide pandemic. It's an issue that the entire world is dealing with. So if one wants to leave New York, they could certainly decide to go to the West Coast or the Midwest or the Northeast. But as you highlighted earlier in the show, it's growing rapidly in certain areas and areas that we wouldn't necessarily think of. So we could leave, but then we're always where we end up, right? If we leave, there I am. So
well, I think more people, it might not be the safety thing. I think a lot of people are like, well, New York's not going to be New York anymore. You can't go to Broadway. And, Marlene, maybe you could chime in. You can't go to Broadway. All the stores are closing. Maybe they'll come back. It seems like you're both very optimistic, which you should be. There really isn't, you can't go to theaters. You don't want to ride the subway. So, New York isn't going to be New York. Do you think, what do you think about that? What do you think about New York? And right.
Look, things are changing. Obviously, New York has always been, I've also lived through the 70s. I've lived through the 80s. Many of us have seen New York go through different incarnations. And one of the positives that I see from the commercial standpoint, I love Marlene's take on it, is that I do feel that landlords had probably be in the past had probably been a little bit too inflexible in terms of rents that they were choosing. And I live on the Upper West Side. So half of Columbus Avenue prior to COVID was vacant because the smaller shops really couldn't afford to have to be in those locations. What I'm hoping is now we have such an interest and an appetite for retail, for cafes, I'm hoping that we're actually going to see a resurgence of new street activity, because there is now such a hunger and a need for support of local businesses. In my own neighborhood, I'm seeing new places popping up where there had been empty storefronts. Yeah. I'm seeing it and I'm not going to pretend that things aren't changing, and of course they are, but they're changing all over the world. So it's going to take some time for this to recover. And we're looking at quite a long time, but I'm seeing a lot of wonderful positive change as well. So,
okay. It is a 3 minutes top the hour. There are some questions. I just want to respond and say one thing, and then I'll respond to Mike, and then I want to say one thing. One of the things that I am super hopeful for is one, maybe we'll become like Paris in New York, right? Where there are going to be
outdoor cafes,
yes. Right? And then secondly, because, real estate, or it might be cheaper to live here at some point, we might, all the, you know, the artists were basically leaving the city because they couldn't afford it, and they were going to other places like LA and well, now LA is expensive too, but some of the more emerging cities like Pittsburgh and Kansas City and Nashville. I'm hoping that like this becomes like the 70s and 80s, like you said, like where there's going to be artists who are living here and coming back and reconstituting the heartbeat of what made New York.
And also, I should add, and I'm someone who, very, as are you, who appreciates the different cultural aspects of New York, whether it's Lincoln Center or Broadway or off Broadway. It is devastating to realize that we do not have at this time the ability to gather in person for any of these experiences. And I'm not sure what that different incarnation will be until these different venues are deemed safe again. I think we're going to see a lot more outside, you know, and if there is an opportunity, which, as you mentioned, you know, just with outdoor cafes, and if there's more of an opportunity for outdoor venues for entertainment. My son just graduated high school, and instead of a prom, there was actually a drive-in movie theater, and we certainly would love to see drive-ins return. You know, we're looking
I
at
actually
alternatives.
just read a piece about driving concerts, right?
Well,
like you know, where, you know, maybe
out of need,
nobody wants to go to
creativity will.
sports anymore. Maybe we'll drive to a stadium now. Maybe like that'll be interesting. We're gonna go back to like prehistoric times.
We're going to have to get creative.
Right. So
have to be
we
creative.
do have to wrap up for the hour, but I don't, are you both like on the go? If to answer questions, it's fine either way. If not, you know, people could email me the questions, and we could always, you know, I could ask you guys to, you know, answer them just by the phone for everybody.
Sure. I have a few minutes.
Okay. Before I go there, I just want to thank everybody again. This has been the summer semester, as I mentioned. Here's the Cindy Gallup. If you go to zeitguide.com/thank you, you could see all the videos we had, including last week's for the last 13. This was with Cindy Gallup, who was amazing in terms of helping us how to end racism in the corporate world. And we're taking a break next week because it's the July 4th holiday. So we have 6 more summer semester classes that are going to go all the way to August 12th. And, you know, these are the people that we've had for the last 4 beginning summer semester culture classes. And then we are going to return to talk about publishing with the founders of Crown Magazine. And they are both Black. And I think I showed you the editorial that Lindsay actually wrote about, you know, what she really feels, how, you know, white people are responding to the racial injustice, the protests, and George Floyd's death. So I wanted to think about like all these publications as mid-tiers like Quartz and Refinery 29 and all these ones that emerged during the digital age are actually laying off a lot of people, where the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal have happened to actually rise in cultural cloud. They've survived mainly through events. And, you know, so I feel like the great legacy ones are surviving and thriving. The mid-tier new ones are really strapped right now. We'll see what happens. And then there's these niche magazines or publications that I really feel excited about. So we're going to learn from Lindsay and Nkrumah. And then the week after, an amazing woman I just met, Roxana Meron. She's a doctor, obviously, and she's a professor of medicine and the director of interventional cardiology, cardiovascular research, and clinical trials. And that's another example of the intersection between COVID and the protests. Because as we know, many of the victims, a large majority of the victims are Black Americans because of a higher risk of heart disease, and in addition, diabetes. And she's also going to tell us about what's been happening in the hospitals in terms of COVID and where we're going to go from there, and the future of heart health. We learned about the brain last week. We're going to go to the heart health. And so that's hopefully exciting. And then the rest after July 15th, I'll let you know who we're going to have. And of course, I like to highlight people from different industries. And so You can find out all about that, zeitguide.com/. Thank you. And so let's go through some questions. There was one that I was interested in. So what's going to happen to the people who are unemployed right now, especially in New York or everywhere in the world? So they're losing their jobs. They don't have income to be able to afford New York City rent. Some who are closing their businesses. I know, Marlene, you just told me that you can renegotiate, but if they're not in business, they have to close. And there are going to be a lot of bankruptcies, as the Wall Street Journal just reported a couple of days ago. Is there any wiggle room? What do we do? Do we have to leave? Do we have to break leases? Do we have to sell our places? Marlene and Mike, you could both chime in on that.
I think there's definitely room for negotiation, but I was in touch with one of the major restaurateurs who are in the Hudson Yards. They own and operate lots of different restaurants, and they may have to close Hudson Yards because that's a fairly new restaurant that they opened, and they can't sustain it. So either the smaller business or the newer restaurants are going to either renegotiate their lease or really say to themselves, hey, I can't operate this. Let me just close up a couple of the newer restaurants or stores, and let me focus on the ones that are really successful and established.
Okay, and Mike.
Tune in.
Oh, sorry, Marlene, what was the last thing you were going to say?
We really have to hone in on what's working for us as a business owner in terms of operation.
Now, some of these businesses who've gotten these loans could actually pay, but it's going to run out. It'll be interesting to see what happens. I mean, I guess if you're a landlord, you can't really penalize somebody if they go out of business, right? Or
Right.
can they?
No, they're not going to penalize it. They're going to do everything to keep the occupancy. They want their spaces occupied as much as you want to stay. So I think now is the time to really negotiate and communicate. I had mentioned and written to the guests there that it's important to negotiate, and communication is key. I think we have to come together. And I know landlords, some of them can be tough, but I think if we communicate properly and really justify, perhaps maybe you're going to pay some rent now or defer the rent for later. There are different ways to negotiate where the landlord doesn't feel like they're losing completely and that they're gaining as well. It has to be win-win on both sides.
Okay, and Mike, what about, I think there are leniencies for mortgages, but if you're renting, it's a gamble, because if I were a landlord, right, I would want to keep the tenant, but I would also want to make the money. So if they're not paying me the money, they'll say, you got to leave. But on the flip side, it might be hard to get somebody else, right?
It's very much a case-by-case situation. If you're renting from one of the large managing agents, the Glenwoods and the Relateds, and that's a different story. Many people do rent homes in, it could be a 6-story townhouse. It could be a family who might own 10 buildings in Brooklyn and may have tenants. And I do imagine that those landlords are going to be probably more sympathetic to someone who's either lost their job or who has had an income reduction. And as Marlene said, no one wants to have to, I shouldn't say no one wants, but owners are not so eager to go and have to try to find new tenants who are going to pay on time. And if you've been a good client, if you've been a good tenant, I'm pretty sure they're going to want to work with you and hopefully make some concessions to keep you there. So it's we're all kind of playing this out as we go along.
Okay, I want to ask you one other thing. Mike, knowing you and seeing your website, you really have been good at, I'm just shifting to this, I just want to show, and Marlene, you could chime in on this too, Mike Lubin. Look at that.
It's horrible.
Yeah.
I can't
No,
look at
it's
myself.
great. It's great. Oh, now you're hanging out in the snow, so maybe we'll have outdoor. You know what I said last week? A great opportunity is to get into the outdoor heater business, right? But you have an interesting brand, right? Both of you. There's so many real estate agents in New York, everywhere in the world. How do you stand out?
So there are It was so.
Marlene, why don't you go first?
Yeah, there are 83,000 supposedly, approximately brokers out there. Now they're saying because of the COVID, there's going to be probably about now 63,000. And what you need to do is to stand out, is stay in constant contact. With the owners. You have to just work a little bit harder and reach out and have that cutting edge, where you have your relationship with your owners, where you have relationship with your buyers. For me, it's getting them the best deal and really focusing on what the needs are right now.
And how do you maintain your reputation? Do you get press? I mean, like, and
A
yeah,
lot of it is word of mouth. I do get press. It's finding off market deals where I can actually, I was told I make my uh, sellers millions of dollars because I'm able to find that either key buyer to 1031 exchange or the right timing, or I'm able to get, a great deal because of my relationship. Let's say on a multifamily property in Brooklyn, because they're selling a portfolio and I'm able to get them a better deal because, again, of timing, of communication, and key is negotiation as well, and making sure that the buyer is in the right light for the seller. The seller always wants to make sure that their buyer is the right buyer for them. And
okay.
communication
So
and press.
it's more about word of mouth, trust. Mike, I know that, I trusted you, but you created, a brand for yourself through media. Look, you have a TV show, uh, but how important is that? Like, what would you say is your shtick, and how did you create that?
I think for me at least, the only thing that works is being true to who you are. And when in any professional situation, I think if we're trying to emulate a character or a competitor that we're seeing, and if it's not authentic to who we are, it's pretty apparent. So I just try to be myself. I'm interested in learning about a lot of different things in terms of reading and culture and spirituality and the outdoors. And so I'm always meeting new people. I'm always trying to become a better version of myself. I'm bringing that into my client interactions, in my marketing. My newsletter reflects sort of things that I'm going through in a real time way. So my newsletter for the next period, which will be next week, kind of discussing the market we're in, is also going to be very much about the outdoors and how we find, serenity outside and in nature. Because I think so many of us,
So you're
are
kind of,
craving.
so you said culture, which obviously is my thing. By the way, before I
Mhm.
forget, why don't you both put your contact information in the chat for people, and maybe
Sure.
they could even subscribe to you or whatever, or social media. Um, yeah, it's interesting to me because Mike, you just said culture, and you're talking about the environment around you, not just about the home you're selling, right? So like you can't just know about the niceties or the aspects of the home, right? You also,
Oh,
like there's a great, like Chelsea, there's these, like about Marlene, you say like maybe this is a way you could collaborate. Like tell them about my ZZ Cafe that I just opened, and Mike could be like, oh, down the street is, so but like you said spirituality and culture, so like it really depends on your personal brand because people have to like you. I mean, real estate agents
and
never
for some people, their brand may be that they're a ruthless negotiator. Everyone has their brand can be that they are working 24 hours a day. So and their brand could also just be that I'm hardworking and I'm going to show up and be courteous and professional. So it doesn't mean that you have to have such a distinctive identity per se, but I do think that we have to be true to who we are, and if we love travel, if we love cooking, bring that into our work. That makes us more interesting to our clients. It draws people to us because we are multidimensional and not just a broker. No one's just a doctor or a lawyer. We are, we're complex. And when you hire a real estate broker, residential or commercial, you're hiring a life expert. It's an expert on that particular city, and that covers a lot of different ground.
So yeah, you need to know that in addition to everything else.
Sure.
Hey, any other last thing I'll ask, and then we could close it. Any other observations you've both been seeing about? I mean, I know you're mainly New York based, and I know you have some properties in Jersey, Marlene. So, do you see any other opportunities or interesting developments in other cities in the country, like people knowing that they have to work from home, they could work from anywhere? Do you see, like we talked about the exodus, but not so much New York exodus? Like, are you hearing about other places of opportunity? Uh, Curious.
I think it's going to be about nature. It's going to be about the outdoors. So if someone can't afford a home outside of where they're living, then they may rent one, or they'll go camping. We are safest, of course, although we see these pictures of people in beaches, cheek by jowl, so to speak, in Miami. But if we're in nature, if we're at a beach, if we're on a mountain, if we're rock climbing, we're safe and we're healthy. So I think more than ever, there will be an appreciation for being healthy in nature and feeling the gratitude for that, which I hope also leads to more appreciation, awareness of the ecosystem and ecology and land conservation. So that's kind of where I see a trend, hopefully. And hopefully it's not just a trend, it's a lifelong new chapter, being more aware and grateful for resources and being in nature.
Okay. Well, so how do you do that in a city? You just find a city that's close to nature that you could.
Or I'm in Central Park every day. I bought a bike a few months ago. You could bike up the Hudson within an hour of New York. As you know, you could be hiking, you could be fishing, you feel like you're in another planet. New York is one of the most blessed states in terms of close access to the cities for beautiful, unspoiled nature. So it's readily available for people who are
And we
interested.
will get through this. We will get through this. And we have to just nurture ourselves while we're going through the slow process of healing and moving forward.
Talk about
Absolutely.
spirituality. Maybe I should fire my shrink and just talk to you every day. Anyway, I'd fire my shrink. I'm just kidding. Anyway, thank you both for coming.
Thank you so much for having us.
I love Culture Class. I love hearing from such interesting, intelligent leaders like both you, Marlene and Mike.
Thank you.
I wish you both the best of luck. Like you said, we've been through this in terms of 9/11 and then the Great Recession. This is a little bit more complicated, I think. And the other thing is that I hope we all think about is, like, obviously we want to change the racial and financial inequality in the world. And, one of the other things that I'm really hoping about this is not only will we bring in more artists, but, we will think about how neighborhoods and housing and zoning is really creating, racial tension and injustice and impacting poor education in poor neighborhoods. So, I'm hoping that everybody in your business thinks about that too moving forward. So I wish.
That's in our business. And I'm sure Mike can agree that that's all racial equality and getting together and as one. That's extremely important. And I think the real estate world really focuses on that. And absolutely, that's important. But
Okay.
we all need to be safe, I have to say, just right this moment. Just really feel safe and heal.
Yes.
Safe and healthy. That's the new trend. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Again, next week, we're skipping the week after, July 8th, that Wednesday, 2 p.m. East Coast time, 11 a.m. Pacific Coast time, 6 p.m. GMT, 7 p.m. UK, 8 p.m. Europe. I think everybody in Asia will be sleeping, but they could see the recording. And thank you all who contributed. I love doing this and hope we could keep doing it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.